I've been in the lab, ladies and gentlemen, doing the in-depth historical research on what makes a successful rookie running back. How can we identify who in this draft class will be at a higher probability of busting versus maybe how do we find those guys in the second round that actually have a shot to be real difference makers on our dynasty teams? Well, I think I've perfected our model or gotten pretty damn close to it. We are going to have some serious updates here. We're going to go box by box, explaining the historical impact, and then I'm going to show you our new model, prove it historically, and show how it is better than Dynasty ADP and how it beats Dynasty ADP. And then lastly, we are going to look at the rookie running backs in this year's draft class and show you which guys we should be drafting, how they score out, and which running backs we should be avoiding. But before we get into it, you better be dropping a like on this. You better be subscribed to the channel if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. And of course, if you want access to more information like this, if you want access to my consistently updated Dynasty rookie running back rankings, which of course will be updated the second we have the NFL draft, you can find all of that on flockfantasy.com. Sign up with promo code FLOCK and you're going to get 30% off any subscription. Not only are you going to get 30% off any subscription, but yours truly will go through and break down your Dynasty team in a podcast. But I think that should be about it. So let's go box by box here. And what I want to be looking at is the Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide that we put out last year. We have some updates that we need to be getting to, but let's just prove why these metrics matter. And let's look at it since 2014. So what I wanted to do, right, is I wanted to track every running back that's been drafted in Dynasty rookie drafts since the year 2014. How we did this is I went to DLF.com where they've had Dynasty ADP since 2014. I mean, they've been in the game longer than anybody else essentially. And we grabbed every running back that had been drafted and we looked at their overall startup ranking. Because obviously, after Saquon Barkley's drafted in 2018, he's already going in round one of Dynasty startup drafts. Whereas if we're going to be looking at 2019 with where you had David Montgomery going, David Montgomery's not going round one. Okay, so we went through and we plotted exactly where all these running backs were being drafted and where they were overall in the NFL draft. So you're going to see that on the y-axis, the overall pick for the running back in the NFL draft. And on the x-axis, you are going to be seeing where they were going in Dynasty startup drafts as a rookie. Okay, so you will see that those guys that go higher in the NFL draft in general go higher in Dynasty startup drafts. And then as we get further and further and further along, those running backs that went later in the NFL draft go later in Dynasty rookie drafts. Duh. I mean, I think everybody understands that. But how we are going to filter this down and look for running backs that actually manage to have success is we are going to be going 2 years after they were drafted. So they've already played their rookie year. They've already played their sophomore year. And we are going to look at the running backs that were left over in the top 100 picks of Dynasty startup drafts. So if you were a running back drafted, say 2014, you're Bishop Sankey, and you were initially someone that people were very excited about, but then 2 years later, you were falling to pick 120, you were falling to pick 150 in Dynasty startup drafts, you were a bust, and you are not going to be considered a successful running back in Dynasty. So you are only going to see the players that had success 2 years into their NFL career on this graph afterwards. So you're going to see, yes, there are significantly fewer running backs, but what we need to understand and what we need to look at is those running backs that had success were all almost drafted within the top 100 picks of the NFL draft. Like if we look at that first graph versus that second graph, if we just want to narrow it down and have a much better shot at predicting a running back that's going to have success, we can say, okay, well, if you were drafted inside the top 100 picks of the NFL draft, you're probably going to have a shot. Whereas if you fall outside the top 100 picks of the NFL draft, you are going to have to overcome some things, definitely. And we can see that in this chart that we made. I mean, if you were a top 32 pick since the year 2014, and this sample is going to look at 2014 through 2020 because that's the large enough sample that we have to see how these running back careers have played out. There were 10 of those players, 8 of whom had success. So you're seeing a massive jump up with the success rate for those guys that went top 32. Top 64, you're going to see a similar jump, right? So that first graph that we look at, out of all of the running backs that are drafted in Dynasty rookie drafts, about 28% of them were drafted inside the top 2 rounds of the NFL draft. But then if we are going to look at all of the running backs that had success, it's not 28%, it's much higher than that. The running backs that actually had success was 58% drafted inside the top 64 picks. We can see the same thing with the guys inside the top 100. Really only 5 names that had dynasty value 2 years into their NFL career that were not selected inside the top 100 picks of the NFL draft. So this shows us that draft capital matters significantly. Significantly. Obviously, we should understand that because NFL teams, they take into account everything. They take into account how the running back looks on film. They take into account the contact balance of the running back. They take into account the decision-making of the running back. They take into account everything. So draft capital is going to be highly predictive, but it's also going to be very predictive in the fact that if a running back gets selected early in the NFL draft, an NFL team is going to give them a shot, okay? If Bijan Robinson goes top 10, right? And trust me, I will be at the NFL draft on the red carpet and I will be able to interview Bijan Robinson. So I am rooting for this guy. I want nothing more than him to have success. And of course, if you want to see us on the red carpet, you can do so on our main YouTube channel before the NFL draft. Thank you so much for allowing us to get there. And I really want you to be there and watch that live stream with us. But anyway, with Bijan Robinson, say hypothetically, he's really bad, right? It's not true, but just say he's really bad. But a team selects him inside the top 10. They are going to give him opportunity after opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to actually do something because they've invested so much into him. Whereas if a running back, I don't know, say Zach Evans goes at pick 130, you never know if he's even going to get a shot. He could be really good, but we never know if he's going to get on the field to prove it. So draft capital matters so much for predicting if a running back's actually going to get a chance to prove that they have the talent at the next level. And then obviously it lets us know what the NFL talent evaluators think. And it's probably predictive on if the running back's good in the first place. So draft capital matters a ton. What also matters from a fantasy football perspective will be the BMI of a running back. So if we're going to go through and look at these two charts, the same process that we had with draft capital, of course, but if we want to look at not necessarily just the scatter plot, but instead if we want to look at it laid out in a table for us, you are going to see that all of the running backs that really have success generally have a BMI over 30. Yes, you have 6 guys that had a BMI that was under 29.5. But in reality, if you are going to have success, you need to have a BMI that's over 29.5, preferably in the 30 range, because this tells us you have the ability to handle a 3-down workload. You have the size to be able to handle a 3-down workload. So this chart clearly indicates that. And if we are going over and looking at the speed of running backs, we're going to see something very similar. Of course, we can look at the 40-yard dash scatter plots, which should show you, yeah, I mean, you have a lot of running backs that get drafted in their rookie drafts that are slow, a lot of guys that run slower than a 4.6, but in reality, the players that have success, they all run faster than a 4.6. I mean, right now, if you're looking at the players that had success running that slow, 3 names. You had 3 guys. One of them was James Conner as well, who we'll show you in this process. James Conner is such an outlier because obviously the man overcame cancer. Like it's not like we can be looking at James Conner and saying that he's predictive going forward. So if you wanted to remove him from the sample, you had 2 guys that you were looking at that had that success. And then receiving down ability, we're going to look at essentially the same thing here. Now, this is going to be college target share. So what we decided to do is we went through and we looked at the targets on a per game basis that running back accrued in his offense. And then we divided that by the passing attempts on a per game basis that college offense had. So this tells us just how, in general, a running back is involved in the passing game for their respective college offense. And in general, running backs have to be able to draw more than 7.5% of their team's college target share. There were only 6 backs that were not able to hit that mark that had success in fantasy. So if we are going through and looking at all this, you can start to combine some of these things. And you can see, yes, with every one of these metrics, you can find an outlier, right? So if we're going to go through and say, look at some outliers for the guys that maybe didn't catch the ball in college, but had success in the NFL. You're looking at names like Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs. Those players had success at the next level. And you can throw A.J. Dillon onto that list. But also, what did those players have? Those players had elite marks elsewhere. Those players were either elite athletes or they had monstrous size. What you can't have for these running backs is you can't have them coming in and missing two of these thresholds. You can't have two massive red flags on the same profile and then expect a running back to be able to overcome it. This is why the second we had the NFL Combine last offseason, we looked at Isaiah Spiller and said, he is smaller than we thought. He is slower than we thought. He doesn't hit either minimum threshold. It's not going to work out for him. That's why we looked at Kyren Williams, went with how small he is, with how slow he is, he has no shot. So no, if you miss out on one of these boxes, it's not the end of the world. But this is to go through and show that these boxes are very predictive of fantasy football success at the next level. And when we start to combine them all and come up with an overall grade for these running backs coming out of school, it is highly predictive. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to go through and sort these running backs as prospects. We actually threw in the 2021 class because now we have their second season under the books and we're able to see that ADP with where they stand now. And I wanted to group these by where they were being drafted as rookies in Dynasty startup drafts. That way we can go back retroactively, give them a prospect score, and we can look back and say, does our process work? Does our model work? So for instance, group one here that we are going to be looking at will be Saquon Barkley, Zeke, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor, Leonard Fournette, Najee Harris, Todd Gurley, J.K. Dobbins, Melvin Gordon. The reason we grouped these guys together is these were the guys that were going highest in Dynasty startup drafts their rookie season. And if we are going to go through and grade all these guys as prospects, you will see their prospect grades on the far column. Not only are you going to see their prospect grades, but you will also see in green and in red the outliers in this sample. You're going to see, okay, yeah, Saquon Barkley scores higher in our prospect model than any of these other running backs do. That means that Saquon Barkley is probably someone we should be willing to go out there and we should be willing to draft in round one of our Dynasty startup drafts. And it also shows us the guys highlighted in red, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, J.K. Dobbins, Melvin Gordon, these running backs that were also going at the very top of startup drafts their rookie season. If they're highlighted in red here, it shows, okay, these were the lowest scoring running backs out of the group. That tells us that they are more likely to bust according to our model than the other guys, and we should probably not be looking to draft these players as rookies. So this is a way to just go through and say, does our model work? Are we better at identifying the hits and the bust than regular Dynasty ADP? Because this was sorted by Dynasty ADP their rookie season. So we go down to the second group of guys here, the guys that we have labeled as hits in this group: Christian McCaffrey, Travis Etienne, DeAndre Swift. Our model is saying draft them everywhere you can in Dynasty startup drafts their rookie season. The bust in this group, we're going to be Javonte Williams. Yeah, you probably shouldn't have drafted him. Darius Guice. Yeah, you probably shouldn't have drafted him. And then Josh Jacobs. Now, with Jacobs, of course, we have a long history. But anyway, going over to our next group of guys, the hits that we have, who we have graded out higher than anybody else in this group: Dalvin Cook, Rashad Penny, Nick Chubb. The bust, you shouldn't draft these guys: Ronald Jones, TJ Yeldon, Miles Sanders. The group after this, the bust that we have: Royce Freeman, Tevin Coleman, Trey Sermon. The hits that we have in this group: Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara. So you're beginning to see that this prospect model that we've gone through and poured hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of research into is highly predictive. We go to our next group: Samaje Perine, Kenneth Dixon, Jay Ajayi. These are the busts. The hits: Kareem Hunt, Keyshawn Vaughn, Duke Johnson. Now, of course, it's not 100% accurate all the time. Keyshawn Vaughn may pop up as a hit here and it doesn't really work out. But if we're able to use this and then allow it to just make us better than Dynasty ADP, which it clearly is, it's telling us to draft Kareem Hunt and avoid, Kenneth Dixon. we should go ahead and listen. Our next group, David Johnson, it has graded out as the highest running back here. I mean, A.J. Dillon, the second highest. And then after that, the lowest guys, Justice Hill, Terrence West, Damian Harris, Paul Perkins. Probably should have avoided them. Our group after this, we have Antonio Gibson, Nyheim Hines as our highest graded players. Our lowest graded players, Joe Williams, Jamal Williams, Matt Jones. Our group after this is the one that I want to highlight. We'll throw the rest on the screen as well. But this is where really the model got wrong. And this is the only time it got wrong, right? Anthony McFarland, Kenyon Drake, DeAndre Washington, Alexander Madison were the players you should be targeting in this range in their rookie drafts. And yes, I would say, yeah, you hit on Kenyon Drake. If you took Kenyon Drake in the third round of your Dynasty rookie draft, bravo. You hit on Alexander Madison. You took him in the third round of your Dynasty rookie draft, bravo. But it does label James Conner as an avoid. It does label James Conner as a bust. But at the same time, it's understandable on why this happens. We should have known, and if you were going back to the 2017 NFL draft, that James Conner is someone that you put a massive asterisk next to his prospect score with because his entire college history, okay? So, yes, we missed on James Conner, and that's the one guy really that was labeled as a bust that we should have been drafting here, but I think it's understandable on how that happens. And we can go through and show the rest of these guys. These are just like complete dart throws. They were going at the very, very, very end of Dynasty startup drafts, so there's not too much to take away. I'd say, I mean, we identify the guys you definitely don't want to be drafting. Out of all these targets, really only one or two of them hit, but those were massive hits in Aaron Jones and James White for the cost that you're getting those prospects at. So overall, I hope this was useful in showing that these metrics matter. And when we combine them, we can be more predictive than Dynasty ADP of who is going to be a target and who is going to be a bust. So what I want to do now is I want to go over and look at how the 2023 prospects scored. And I want to go through and compare them to other guys that we have. The first one being Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson scores a 28, which the only other running backs to score this high since the year 2014 coming out of school were Saquon Barkley at 31. Barkley was a better prospect than Bijan. Trust me, I love Bijan. And then Leonard Fournette as well. Obviously, Leonard Fournette, it's hard to remember how good of a prospect he was coming out, but he was an elite athlete. He caught the ball at LSU. He was a top 5 NFL draft pick. He had all the size in the world. Leonard Fournette was a great athlete. So if we're looking at this, Bijan Robinson, I mean, pretty much he's a guaranteed hit. The only other guys that scored close to him, like the guys who scored 27, who he's directly ahead of, Ezekiel Elliott, Jonathan Taylor, Najee Harris, Todd Gurley, Travis Etienne. So in my mind, yeah, I'm willing to draft Bijan Robinson in round 1 of Dynasty startup drafts. I mean, I already have Bijan Robinson ranked as our #1 overall running back in Dynasty, and I think that this shows why we have it that way. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs scores a 28, and of course, these scores will be updated as we actually get the correct NFL draft capital. These are just projections right now. But with Jahmyr Gibbs scoring a 23, it puts him at the same mark that we had with Joe Mixon, as well as Cam Akers and Antonio Gibson coming out of school. So with Jahmyr Gibbs, obviously, it looks very different than Bijan Robinson, right? It's not like you're a locked and loaded, guaranteed stud Dynasty running back as Bijan is, but you're still very good. You still have a very high ceiling. I mean, the guys that score directly ahead of you, you have Christian McCaffrey at 24, and then directly behind you, you have Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry at 22. So Jahmyr Gibbs scores in a solid range. It's not like he's a guaranteed massive hit like Bijan Robinson, but you should be excited about him. Now, going over to our next guy, we're going to be looking at Zach Charbonnet, obviously falling down here a bit. And this is where we get in the range where it's not a guarantee that your running back's going to hit. He scores a 19. And if we're going to highlight all the running backs that scored from 20 to 18, so in this range, you do have some massive hits, right? We have Melvin Gordon, Bishop Sankey, Kareem Hunt, David Johnson, Duke Johnson, Josh Jacobs, Darius Guice, Javonte Williams, Keyshawn Vaughn, J.K. Dobbins, Amir Abdullah, Kerryon Johnson, Darrell Henderson, A.J. Dillon. So you have some running backs that were pretty big hits on this list, such as David Johnson, Josh Jacobs, Melvin Gordon, Kareem Hunt, but you also have some very big misses. And I think we can safely say that's probably about the range Zach Charbonnet falls into as a prospect. Now, after Charbonnet, this is where we get a significant fall off, right? Our next best rookie running back with how they graded out is actually Sean Tucker, who's a 16. You can see all his comps here. And with Sean Tucker, like, trust me, I would want to go all in on him, but we have so many conflicting reports on where he's going to go in the NFL draft. There's some heart issue that all of a sudden we have to deal with. So I think Sean Tucker will maybe be someone to ignore the model with. If he does get the NFL draft capital, I'm all in on Sean Tucker. But very similar to Justin Ross last year, it's like, okay, even if he scores out highly for us, if there are some medical concerns that we need to be aware of, and if he falls extremely late in the NFL draft, it probably tells us to ignore the model. That probably tells us to avoid him in drafts, even though I love Sean Tucker. Now, our next range of guys is going to be a muddy mess. We have Chase Brown at 14, but then outside of that, we have everybody else at 13. And this is what makes this class so weird, is that we have this entire group of guys all about the same, right? Like if we were looking at 11, 12, and 13 scores, I mean, we have Deuce Vaughn at 11. At 12, we have Roschon Johnson. At 13, we have Tajay Spears, Devin Achane, Tank Bigsby, and we have Izzy there as well. And then 14, Chase Brown. So all of these guys are almost identical in our model. And that is why it's been so difficult for me to go through and say, this is the player that we want. This is the player that we are targeting in the second round of rookie drafts. I think the range of outcomes for all these running backs are incredibly similar. I think we're primarily going to be waiting until we actually get the NFL draft, until we know the landing spot, know the draft capital of these players. And we recently made a video going through and talking about if I were to make a bet on one of these players before the NFL draft, the reason I would bet on Roschon Johnson over some of these other names, even if Roschon Johnson maybe say scores a 12 instead of a 13, like all these other players, is with Roschon Johnson, you can come up with an excuse on why he scored so low. You can say he played in the same backfield as Bijan Robinson. And if Roschon Johnson didn't have Bijan Robinson in his same backfield, and say that he actually scored out very well with his target share, you could see Roschon jumping up to a score of 16. So if I had to make a bet on any of these backs here, I would make that bet on Roschon, because I think he has the more compelling argument on why maybe the model is not all in on him. And keep in mind, in this model, if you score down there at like 12, 13, 14, you're pretty much going to be a bust. Like maybe we get some spot starts from you. Maybe you turn into like Marlon Mack, right? Maybe you turn into Deontay Foreman. Maybe you turn into Devin Singletary. But you're not an exciting player. It's not like you're Zach Charbonnet and you can turn into David Johnson, Josh Jacobs, Kareem Hunt with your range of outcomes. So that's why I just really want to stress that these second round backs, don't get too excited about any of them. I think you're taking them more so as depth options to hopefully turn into like the Marlon Mack, Alexander Madison type of player. But I think that's all we have for this video. Again, if you enjoyed it, please go down there, drop a like, subscribe if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. Thank you so much for getting us to the NFL draft. Thank you so much for getting us on the red carpet. I really appreciate all of you. It's going to be awesome. I really want you to be able to share the experience with us. But thank you for everything, and I really hope you have a great day.